Gallery in Hamilton. We're in our Hess Street Gallery this afternoon to spend a half an hour with one of Canada's finest young artists, Paul Sloggett. We currently have an exhibition of Paul's works running until December the 12th, and I'll take this chance to encourage you to come to our gallery and see this wonderful exhibition. It really is a tremendous exhibition of very, very exciting, colorful paintings, and we certainly hope that you have a chance to come down and view it. Anyways, I'll introduce you. This is Paul Sloggett, and Paul, what I'd like to do is spend the next half hour talking a little bit about you and your life, and maybe we can start back in 1950.
1950. Okay. August 7th, 1950, that's when I was born. Campbellford, Ontario. Small little town along the Trent River. And my grandparents still live there. And so we do have a lot of family roots still in that location. It's kind of a pretty little place, and it has a nice atmosphere, having the river run right through everything. So that's where I was born, and I lived there briefly, but I've been back a lot of times since since I grew up because of the family roots that we have in the area. My father's a school teacher. Gets a little fed up with that, I think, teaching in a one-room schoolhouse in the middle of nowhere, and decides to take the family to Oshawa when during the 50s, the automotive boom was really on there in Oshawa, and everybody pretty well was working for General Motors. So he does that for a while, and it doesn't really work out. I don't think it appeals to somebody with an education at that time. So he moves on from there. We live in Oshawa. My mother, at that time, she starts to get quite interested in acting, and kind of being a farm girl, and it's just about as far away from her sensibilities as you could possibly get. But she's really quite flamboyant and gregarious sort of person. So she ends up taking up doing some little theater work, and acquires, I guess, or has always been interested in art. Ends up bringing home books from the library and whatnot, and so I start to see books from French Impressionists at a really early age. And I'm just a kid. She says, "Here, have a look at these." I look at them, I think, I really like these, and they just immediately appeal to me. And not that I ever thought that I could do it, or it wasn't anything more than that, but I was interested right off the bat. I mean, that was like 5 or 6 years old, and I can still remember it happening. So, and then, as you grow up and you end up going to high school, you do what everybody does. I mean, I played hockey like everybody else, and I enjoyed that. I developed quite an interest in music, which I pursued until I was about 20 years old. And I played with a lot of local bands in the area, and that time it was rock music, and it later led into playing some jazz. But I was fortunate enough in my high school years to have an art teacher who, and I think in high school it's really odd that you get a teacher who's a real human being. Most of them weren't. And this guy really was. He was just a super person, a real person. And through his art classes, I mean, I respected him as an individual, and he was really, really encouraging. And I thought, gosh, like he was probably the closest thing that I could ever come in contact with about what an artist was. Even though he was a high school teacher, he puttered around on his own. But he was very influential, and he was very dedicated, and he just, he directed us in kind of in the right way. He wasn't very heavy-handed about what he did. It wasn't something like draw like this or paint like that or you have to do this. His role, I think, was just to try to bring it out from within the students. And as a result, he had several people that went on to later go on to the Ontario College of Art. And at that time, I made the decision when I was about 15 or 16 years old that, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be an artist. I looked around me and I saw a lot of people that were working and kind of waiting for retirement, and I thought, well, waiting for retirement to have fun, to have an exciting life there. And I thought, well, gosh, like 60 years old. I mean, I'm like 15, seemed like an eternity. So I thought, well, geez, like, there's got to be ways of having an interesting sort of life right from day one.
I think at this time you were interested and were quite seriously looking at the Group of Seven, and
Absolutely.
you were very strongly influenced by guys like Tom Thompson and
Absolutely.
that whole movement.
They were real heroes.
Yeah, maybe you could spend some time and talk about that.
They were real heroes. I mean, being a Canadian and growing up, I mean, you're kind of force-fed the Group of Seven, but I liked everything that they stood for. I liked the fact that they were out in the wilderness, camping, painting out of doors. The subject matter that they did and everything really appealed to me. I was very interested in camping and canoeing and that sort of thing myself. So I ended up going up to a lot of the areas that they had painted in Algoma and Algonquin Park and whatnot, and, on canoe trips and sketching and doing work, quite similar. And at that point, I mean, they were sort of the major influence in a young career. And after you go to art college and everything, you learn, the Group of Seven, well, they're only, these guys. But I've always maintained my love of this stuff, and I still think that, Tom Thompson is just a sensational painter. Mm-hmm. And some of the pieces that Lauren Harris did too, I'm quite attracted toward the later abstract pieces. Mm-hmm. And initially, I liked some of the more serene kind of sculptured landscapes that he did, and they have a wonderful mood to them. But I was very strongly influenced by looking at that stuff, and I liked their lifestyle and everything they stood for.
Right.
And so anyway, I was accepted at the Ontario College of Art, mm-hmm. 1969, I believe it was.
There were some things that happened to you prior to that time that we discussed. I think at about 18 you came in contact with the work of Richard Diebenkorn, and also we should maybe spend a moment talking about that, and also the exhibition that Michael Snow had at the AGO.
Right. Right. Well, the piece of Richard Diebenkorn's that I saw was probably one of the first pieces of abstract art that I'd come in contact with, and it was out of a collection that was being exhibited at the Robert McLaughlin Gallery in Oshawa. And I saw this painting, and I felt so moved by I think more the application of paint, the quality of the picture, the classical sense of composition and structure, and the sense of space within the picture plane. I was really moved by this thing, and I like the touch, like the application of paint that he used. So once again, I think that was a real influential kind of moment, even though it was like probably a minor exhibition of somebody's collection. It was really influential. So later I went on to OCA, and during my first year, there was a terrific exhibition at the Art Gallery of Ontario of Michael Snow's, a retrospective that he had. And I found I was just really interested in all the perceptual plays that he was working with, and it was a tremendous exhibition. And it was at that time, I mean, although my work is nothing anywhere near Michael Snow's, it's at that time that I really figured out that I don't want a career in advertising. I want to do something that's going to be a little bit more significant. Mm-hmm. And so I chose at that point to go into what was the drawing and painting department. And that was probably the luckiest thing that ever happened to me, because that year that I was accepted into that department, it was my second year of OCA, Dennis Burton takes over the entire department. Dennis Burton brings in all his buddies. Brings in Graham Coftree, Gord Rayner, and Robert Markle, and he rotated at that time periods amongst a lot of the younger up-and-coming artists that were in that city. Dan Solomon, David Bolduc. He was bringing artists in from London, the Rabinovich brothers, Royden and David, Ron Martin. So we, at that time, felt that we were being taught by the leading edge of the avant-garde in that city, and the energy was just fantastic. And I think that I was very lucky to be in second year at that time. And those guys were very benevolent and very helpful. They couldn't do enough. We were, all the time, we were going to exhibitions that they were having. We were seeing them socially as well. So it became like a real sense of community. Several people that I went to school with in that particular year are still working, and that's, rare, actually.
Yeah, that's
a rare
right.
occurrence. There's Phil Richards, David Craven, just to name a couple. And I think those artists are both doing really significant works of art, and I know because of the influence that Dennis Burton had and the teachers that he brought in, it was primarily one of the reasons why we're all still doing it. So
you were also at one time working directly with Coffrey. I think you were
That's
assisting
right,
him
yeah.
in his studio, and so there was really really a direct contact, not just from a teaching standpoint, but you were building a friendship with these people as well.
That's right. I think Graham is, Coffrey is one person who perhaps teaches best by kind of example. And watching him work, I used to stretch canvases for him and prime them and whatnot, and I was at his place a lot. I lived right across the road from him on Spadina in a studio, and I don't know, they used to, I guess, feel sorry for me sitting over there eating sardines and whatnot. They'd invite me over for supper all the time, so it was just like a second home.
Who were at this period, during this period, which is during the time that you were involved with all these artists, who was the strongest influence on you during this early, because I mean you were still only 19, maybe 20 years old at this time, right?
Right.
You were still quite young. Who were the artists that you were really looking at seriously, the artists that were directly affecting your work?
Okay, at OCA, at that particular time, I was really interested in Frank Stella. I remember pretty well everything he did, right from the early, concentric black pictures up to the more eccentric shaped ones. And I started to really head out in that direction, being very interested in a more sculptural approach to painting, a painting that was somewhat of a hybrid between painting and sculpture. And that was a stance that I took at a very early kind of age and stuck with it. I think it's just part of my sensibility that I've been working with all the way along. After I graduated from the college, I was, the earlier pictures that I was doing, I was very influenced at that time by looking at other sculptors, and not so much painters, but looking at people like, I was really into David Smith, for example, Mark de Souvero, American constructivist sculptures. I was really interested in that. Also, that led me to gain an interest too in Cubism. Leo Gonzalez sculpture as well was really influential. So I had a feeling then that when I wasn't so much painting a picture as I was building a painting.
Right.
And it's something that's really stuck with me all the way along.
Well, your work has certainly changed over the years. Your direct involvement living on Spadina and Dundas and the connection with Coftry and Rayner, I mean, that must have been very influential, especially at a young age. You continued to live in Toronto after you were married, and I think that your association with David Baldock at that time really was important to you.
Absolutely. And once again, I think I got lucky. Just heading into the subway, I remember the day. I was heading into the subway right in front of the Royal Ontario Museum. David's coming out of the subway. And I had met David earlier. As I mentioned, he was one of the teachers that we'd had, that Dennis had brought in. He was a very young artist then, and he'd just come back from Afghanistan. And he invited us up to the studio at that time, and we'd seen pictures that he was working on, and I really thought he was something else. And anyway, he, at that point, was looking for someone else to share a studio space. He was sharing a studio with another artist, and who later died, unfortunately, David Watson, a young, very talented guy. And so the spot kind of opened up in the studio, and so David and I were there sharing it, the two of us ourselves. And I feel I was really lucky because David was older than I was. He was a bit more established. I mean, he was a lot more established. And so he had a constant kind of stream of really interesting people coming over, and people who were really well connected in the art world. I mean, it was one person after another. We'd have, you know, artist curator Kieran Wilkin would be there one day. The next day you'd have Jack Bush, you know, coming over to look at pictures, and it was just fantastic. We had people from, David had a lot of people gravitate toward the studio, and he has a lot of really varied interests as well. So we had everybody from Oriental rug dealers popping in there all the time, drawing.
Is that right?
It's a phenomenal collection of Oriental rugs, and he's quite a scholar in the field.
Mm-hmm.
And from everybody from Oriental rugs to whale noises, you know, recorded whale noises. And so the people we had through the studio were so interesting. I mean, it was really an education in itself.
This was really a pivotal point, I think, in your career. In
Absolutely.
that you were very fortunate at 25 years old to come in contact with not just Jack Bush, but David Mirvish.
That's right.
Maybe you'd like to spend some time and talk about that.
A friend of David's, David Bolduck's, was Alcas Clonaritas, and he was the manager of the David Mirvish Gallery at that point. And so he used to be overseeing David's paintings quite often. David himself was between galleries at that point, and he was doing a lot of pictures, and they were just starting to evolve into the paintings that have the images in the central portion of the grounds. Alcas used to come over all the time, and finally David said, you know, to Alcas, gee, you should take a look at this guy's pictures too. He's doing some really hot stuff, and even me. So I start showing Alcas pictures, and Alcas says, geez, yeah, these aren't too bad. Maybe I can set up a meeting for David Mirvish to come down here. Now, by and by, that eventually took place, and I almost thought I'd missed my chance because David got ill and he had to go in the hospital. And I thought, oh, they're going to forget about it for sure. But they didn't. He comes back about a month later, comes to the studio. I mean, this is somebody that's showing some of the most important artists in the world, right? He's got Frank Stella, Robert Motherwell, Jules Lelitsky. I mean, the list just went on and on and on. Frankenthaler, Lewis, you know. And these were, I mean, international heroes, right? So, and there I was, this Canadian kid, and Mirvish comes in, looks at the work and says, do you have a dealer at this point? And I said, no. He says, how would you like to be represented by my gallery? And I mean, it was just unbelievable. You know, it was quite a moment. So I said no.
Yeah, wouldn't that be something?
So anyway, well, I said yes, of course. And they ended up showing with the likes of Jack Bush, and at that point, David Mirvish was taking on several other Canadians, Paul Fournier, Kay Graham, Millie Risford, David Bolduck, Eric Gamble, and we started having exhibitions there together. And I felt really honored. I felt like I was a little bit out of my league. It's kind of like it happened a little bit prematurely, and I hadn't quite paid all my dues. But I feel like I've paid them now.
Okay. When you're talking about your track record, of course, your reputation has grown over the years, and the quality of your painting is certainly tremendous. What I'd like you to talk about a little bit is your American exposure. You did a show called 14 Canadians, organized by Andrew Hudson in the U.S. Maybe you could start with that and talk a little bit about your exposure in the States.
All right. That was, again, another lucky moment. And the critic Andrew Hudson came to Canada, traveled all across the country, and selected 14 people to represent Canada at an exhibition that's going to be held at the Hirshhorn Museum in Washington, D.C. And that, the people that, once again, I believe I was one of the youngest artists to be included in the exhibition, and they took quite a survey. They took, I mean, it went from everybody, gosh, you know, the age groups were just really quite fantastic. Unfortunately, prior to the exhibition, Jack Bush had died. This was in 1977, I believe, and he had passed away, oh, I think maybe just only a month before the show had opened. And he was one of the people that were, of course, in the exhibition. and in ages, I guess it varied from myself to Jean-Paul Lemieux. And I felt, once again, that was a tremendous kind of burst of energy and tremendous thing to have happen to you. I had kind of international or national outside Canada exposure anyway. And at that time that the exhibition was on at the Hirshhorn Museum, four of the painters were asked to exhibit at a private gallery, the Diane Brown Gallery, and we had a small private exhibition at the same time, which really went very well for me. I think we sold out the entire show within a matter of a day, so it was quite outstanding, which prompted her to ask me to send down another shipload of paintings. Well, it takes a long time to paint a picture, and I'm not going to be rushed into it. I want to take my time, and I want to make sure that the quality is there. So I poured over them, got them together, sent them down. Lucky enough, she was able to do her magic, and so at that time there had been an art dealer from California who was visiting Washington, saw my exhibition and liked my exhibition, and wanted to have an exhibition of my paintings in California. So here I was, I mean, at the ripe old age of 28, having my second one-man show in the United States. It sold out as well. And I hadn't even had a show in Toronto yet. And painting
Amazing.
in Toronto, yeah. So it's kind of strange the way things happened or the way things got going. But the American audience was really quite positive towards the work, which gave me a lot of encouragement as well. So right after that, the David Mirvish Gallery closed down, and Elka's Klonaritas' manager opened up a gallery, and I've been with Elka's in Toronto since. Mm-hmm. And it's been I've had much better kind of action and criticism coming from the States than I have from Canada. Fortunately, I just recently received my first positive review in Canada, so I still think there's some hope.
Yeah, that's right. Well, a lot of artists have established themselves outside the country before they've really made a hit in Canada anyways. This has sort of been the trend.
Yeah, I guess so. It seems to have a right. Jack Bush, for an example.
Riopelle did the same thing.
Riopelle did the same thing.
He went outside Canada and then came back.
That's
so
right.
This show in Washington, was it called Four Toronto Painters?
That's right. Four Toronto Painters.
Right.
The David Bolduc, Paul Fournier, Kay Graham, and myself.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Now, you spent some time in Europe not long after that. You were telling me that you, in 1977, got away for a 6-week trip.
That's right.
And that was quite influential as well.
Absolutely.
In regard to your work.
Well, up till that time, being in this country and, having the AGO is kind of the standard of where you can go and see things. If you live in Toronto, you rarely get to see anything of any real international quality. So seeing pictures like Velázquez and Matisse and Cézanne and seeing the Impressionists. I had the opportunity to go to France, go to the Louvre, the Jeu de Paume, the Orangerie, and Rodin Museum, and it was spectacular. All the things I've been looking at in books I've seen for the first time in real life, and it was great. So from France we went to Italy. I toured through Florence and Rome, and at that same time I had a small exhibition in Bologna, Italy. And from there we went down and spent a little time kind of relaxing after that barrage of cities in Greece. And that's when I first started to do watercolors kind of on site, so to speak, and letting kind of, the surroundings really influence what it is that you do. So ever since then, every location, every time I've gone away, anywhere, I take watercolors and make small sketches, and they generally initiate or generate larger paintings in the studio when I get back.
Mm-hmm. Let's, I think we're slowly running out of time here, but maybe we should spend some time and talk about this exhibition. There's a range of work from the shaped canvases to the more recent things. We have a painting back from 1976 in this exhibition. Maybe you could spend some time, pick out a painting and talk about your what you're doing today and maybe the influences, and
Right.
give us a little more of a feeling
think-
of you and your work.
Once again, I think that I still think of myself as building a painting, and so sculpture really comes into making paintings for me. And the sculptural kind of additives that I've incorporated into the pictures, I think are absolutely necessary. I'm just not convinced myself, anyway, that I can do what I want to do strictly illusionistically. So I've taken the liberty of building up, collage, wood elements that are in relief to the picture, a lot of texture, that's in the painting, and of course I really do have an interest in color and paint application. And I think that, I find that my interests have evolved, and that the interests probably of a mid-career painter are much different than the interests of a painter initiating his career, and likely much different than a painter toward the end of his career. And I'm finding right now that I spend a lot of time looking at some really classical works of art, everything from Matisse to Degas to Velázquez, Piero della Francesca, and often I'll reinterpret what I see in those paintings in my paintings. For example, this painting here, the color in the background comes directly out of Bonnard, and I look at those paintings and I really like those paintings, and they excite me, to kind of want to do something about it too. And I don't think of it as in a plagiaristic way, but kind of like a homage. So in this particular picture here, I called it Bonnard, and it came from looking at his pictures for a couple of months. Spent a lot of time looking at pictures of Matisse, and you can take a painting like this, for example, that's really heavily influenced by the kind of color composition and the directness, kind of paint application and everything that Matisse used. I think that if I have anything to say is that I really do enjoy looking at historical pieces of art. And I think there's an amazing amount of information to be learned. And how I judge a painting to be good myself is a painting that I can learn something from, a painting that teaches me something.
Something new, in other words.
Absolutely.
Well, on that point, unfortunately we've run out of time, but I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you, Paul, very much.
You're most welcome.
And I'd certainly like to encourage you again to come and see this exhibition. It's visually just a phenomenal show. The colors are wonderful. It's a very, very high quality show, and I hope that the people that are viewing this interview will take a chance and take the time to come down and see it. And we thank you very much for coming and visiting us today. Thank you.